Hey, everybody. Thanks for listening to the Kick Your Boots Up podcast. I'm your host, Taylor McAdams, and we are here in Dallas at the Dallas Market Center celebrating and working WESA, which is the Western and English Sales Association show. If you're not familiar with it, it's where brands and customers come to beg, buy, borrow, steal, trade. This is where they're conducting business, and this show happens to be taking place in August. So we're here. Our studio looks a little bit different, but we're so excited to speak with our next guest on the podcast. And really, if you don't know him, buckle up. You're about to be in for a treat. This man has been through it all, done it all, lived to tell the tells, and we're so excited to hear his stories. Without further ado, I've got to introduce you guys to our Justin Brands Territory Manager, David King.
Yay! Oh.
Thank you for being on the
You're welcome.
podcast. I've got to give you a special shout out because a lot of people come on this podcast with like a story or something, and your stories are cool, but you are the number one Kick Your Boots Up podcast listener. So I just want you to know, I should have had a trophy. Here's your trophy, a roper boot. No, but really, it means a lot to have your support as a sales rep. So thank you.
Well, I really enjoyed listening to him. When my oldest daughter was going to grad school, University of Missouri, from there to Mississippi is about an 8-9 hour drive. So she started listening to podcasts. And so she kind of turned me on to them. And so, when you're driving a lot, after a while, the music, even on satellite radio, you hear the same stuff.
Yeah.
And so I ride Harleys. I got some motorcycle podcasts. I listen to some rodeo podcasts. NASCAR, love NASCAR, a lot of Western lifestyle podcasts, our podcast. I just find them a way to really pass the time and just take some monotony out. So,
well, is this your first time being on a podcast?
Yes.
Yes, I'm so excited that you're here.
Yep.
This is going to be awesome. And podcasts, as you know, are all about stories and entertaining and telling the story. And so for you, I'm so excited for the rest of the world to get to hear your story because you've been in the industry for your whole life.
Basically.
But let's back up a little bit. Tell us about how you got to where you are today, everything in between, your dad, everything. Yeah.
Well, of course, my family, we grew up in the horse and cow business. We had... I started showing 4-H horses, high school rodeoed. My brother and my dad showed registered horses. We had mama cows on leased land. And so we've always been involved in the lifestyle. And so in 1971 or 72, my dad bought a saddle shop in Jackson, Mississippi. And that evolved. He had a partner and didn't really kind of work out well. And involved in some other, stores. But I started working back in the saddle shop. And I'd always made belts and did a little leather stuff, but I learned how to really work leather, built a couple of saddles. We just did all kind of stuff like that, And so then it evolved into a store that had a big saddle shop, carried Circle Y saddles. We were a big Circle Y dealer. We had a Purina feed dealership. And I ran the saddle shop. And so, Urban Cowboy rolls around, and we went from just, doing decent business to just insane,
Wow.
It was just pretty crazy. And so my dad ends up going on the road for Circle Y, and I ran the store. And, you had these peaks and valleys for the Urban Cowboy boom, and it was a great peak, but it was a deep valley. And we had a tragedy in our family. My little brother drowned when he was 18. And so I was just ready to get out of the store, and we closed it up. Like 2 years later, the highway was expanding and we got the property anyway. So it kind of ended up being a blessing.
Wow.
But I moved home with my mom and I set up a shop in her backyard. And I made rodeo shops. And did some horse show shops and some bat wing stuff, but mostly rodeo shops.
And you did pickup men shops too, right?
Yeah. So made several pair of pickup men shops and sold rodeo equipment and stuff. I kept a account with Barstow and I think somebody else. Ooh. And so and I learned how to set up a glove for bareback rigging, and I did some of that and just had a good time in rodeo. Now, I couldn't make a living rodeoing, but I could sell enough rodeo shops and stuff to keep going.
Yeah.
And I had met my wife, Karen. We dated for 5 years, been married 38.
Congratulations.
Thank you. But she, her mom wasn't too crazy. Somebody said, "What does David do?" He said, "Well, he rodeos," and she couldn't tell somebody that I did a job. Even though I was making dang good money, but I was living at home, didn't have a bill or care in the world. So I hurt my knee at Memphis. I had at the pro rodeo up there. I had a horse throw me up into the wall and hit my knee, and it was.
You were really quick. You were a saddlebronc rider.
Bareback rider. Yeah.
Okay.
I was a few pounds lighter back then. So, but I didn't go to the doctor, because back, with the way insurance was and stuff, and I figured it'd be all right. And a few weeks later, swelling went down, and felt better, but I had torn a ligament in there, and it kept getting worse. And I tried to tape it and ride it and put a brace, and that just didn't work. But when it started coming out of joint, when I'd roll over in my sleep, I had to get something done. So July 4th of 85, well, I think July 2nd, I had surgery on it.
Okay.
And they put me in it was a posterior cruciate tear. They put me in a long leg cast. And then I was in that thing for like 4 months, and then a brace. Of course, they don't do anything like that now, but that's how you recover from that stuff back then.
Whoa.
So I wasn't really doing anything. So my dad called me one day, and he was living in Missouri at the time, and he said, I have a market in Nashville, and he had some show boards that he used. They hung tack and stuff like that on there. And they were in Mississippi. He said, "Why don't you bring those to Nashville?" And I said, "Yeah, because when we got in the Western store business, I thought all these sales reps would be a cool job.
It would, yeah.
Just really a neat deal."
Yeah.
So I go up there, and I met Cheryl Farrago with Miller Western Wear. And I basically kind of did a mini interview. Now I'm on crutches and, recovering from knee surgery. And so she set it up for me to fly to Denver to interview. And Hank Hibbard was the VP of sales then. And Hank told me, he said, "I decided to hire you when I saw you on crutches and carrying a briefcase." Because he said, "I knew you were serious." And
he meant business.
It's pretty stupid trying to get to the airport with you. But he knew I meant business. Of course, they hired me in the fall of 85, but I told them I couldn't go to work until I finished rehabbing my knee. So that I basically started in January of 86 at the Denver market. Just green as a gourd. I'd been around sales reps, and I'd sold at retail, but I was fortunate with, I worked for them, and I also carried American hats. And every company I ever worked for, I listened to the old reps and I paid attention and I learned what to do. And then I had my dad to bounce stuff off of. So I worked for them for a few years. I work for Panhandle Slim for a couple of years. I go to Stetson and Resistol. And then in in November of 92, I'm at the North American Livestock Show shaping hats for New Wave Boot Store. Okay. Great customer up there. And Billy Averett, who was the Justin rep in Mississippi and Alabama at the time, who was a dear friend of mine, Billy's gone now, he called my brother and said, "Hey, where's David?" Because this is pre-cell phone.
Yeah.
And he told him, he said, "I need to talk to him. Justin is creating some more territories in Texas. I'm going to get to go back home, and I want to recommend him for my territory." And so Ernie calls my wife, Karen, and of course that night I check in with the hotel, and she tells me. So, and I had a contact. I called Billy, and he gave me the contact number of the sales manager at the time, who was Dennis High. And so I kept trying to call and trying to go to payphone and shape hats and everything, and it's kind of hard to do. So I finally, Alan Brock was who owned New Way, and I told Alan what was going on, and he said, "Look, if you need to leave right now," I said, No, I don't need to leave. I just need to be able to get on the phone for a little while, get a hold of Dennis. So I did. I told him what I was doing, and he said, "Oh, that's a good Justin customer. Just stay up there. When you get back home, we'll set something up." And so I got it all set up with Dennis to come to Fort Worth. And so, I go in the office. I remember Joe Baca picked me up. Joe ended up being the sales manager, but Joe
That's
picked me
not
up.
Michael Baca's dad,
No,
is it?
no,
Okay,
no.
okay.
But, he picked me up at the airport, and neat guy. And then Joe ended up retiring for the company. He was there a long time. So I go in there, and I'm sitting in Mr. Justin's office.
Which
And
is crazy to think about.
Yeah, it really was. So Dennis comes in and, introduces himself, and we sit down, and he told me that Mr. Justin was tied up and he might be able to join us, but he might not, And I said, well, I couldn't even hardly speak then at that point. So we got to talking, and Dennis said, I know a king. You happen to be any kin to Ernest King? I said, a little. He's my dad.
That's my dad.
And he was like, he said, if I'd have known that, I wouldn't even brought you out here to interview. I'd have just given you the job.
Which I'm going to interrupt you just for a second because I love the nature of the industry. That's kind of how it is.
Oh,
if
yeah.
you know somebody's name, especially even back then, handshake deals.
Well,
that's awesome.
Every position I got, it was because I was recommended by, but they wouldn't have recommended me if I couldn't have done the job.
Yeah.
So.
Okay, so the story gets better though.
Yeah.
Tell us more about getting to Justin.
Yeah. So a little while later, Mr. Justin comes in. When he introduced, like he needed to introduce himself. And so so he tells me, he said, boy, you sure come highly recommended. He said, I'm thinking maybe you may have bribed some of these guys. And I found out it was so many of these reps recommended me. Of course, I knew Ken Nixon, and I kind of knew Milton Bill, who was in Florida and Georgia. Kenny was in the Carolinas, Tennessee, and Danny Woodson in Louisiana, who Danny's gone now. Then Billy, and then Billy had told some of the other guys, Dan Elder, who was just, Dan was in Missouri and Kansas for years, and he knew my dad. And so there must have been about 10 or 12 guys that had told Mr. Justin to hire me. So that was pretty cool.
That's huge.
So Mr. Justin, we talked a little bit, and he told me, he said, look, y'all want the job? And I said, yes, sir. And he had something else to go do, so me and Dennis and Gary Liggett, who was president then, went and had lunch. And so we come back, and Dennis said, now look, we've got some other people we're interviewing for some of these other jobs, so we're not ready to announce this yet, but we'll, it's a done deal. I said, well, that's just awesome. So I didn't even need an airplane to fly back home. I could have just floated on the clouds. I was just so pumped.
Wow.
So, I guess it was maybe about a week or so later, they called me and thanked me and everything.
Made it official. Yeah.
And I knew there was an orientation because they hired 13 new reps at one time. And there was going to be an orientation like in a week or so, a couple of weeks in December. And they, would be out there. Well, Karen was pregnant with my youngest daughter, Hannah. And we decided that I was going to Texas. If I missed the birth of her, I just did, but that job was too important. Karen did. It was the chance of a lifetime. So the phone rings one day, and it was Mr. Justin. He said, David, he said, Gary Lee on the phone here with me, and just want to welcome you, Justin Boot Company. And he said, we just want to let you know that you don't have to come out here for the orientation. And I said, well, sir, that's okay. Karen and I kind of worked it out. He said, no. He said, you come out here for this orientation, I'm firing your ass. He said, family is more important than anything. He said, you know how to sell. It's just a matter of you come out here, learning how we do things, and there's plenty of time for that. So
wow.
I go back the week between Christmas and New Year's.
Okay.
And basically all I did was sit in Eddie Kelly's office and look at pictures of all these guys, and to see some of those reps with fros and every color leisure suit you can imagine, gold chains from that 70s disco area.
Yes.
They looked like Western pimps with high dollar boots on. It was just crazy. And I know Nancy Thomas talked about some of that archive stuff. So,
see, proof he listens to the podcast. Yeah. We just had Nancy on, just released. Yeah,
the archives are just unbelievable with everything that's in there.
Yeah.
So my first market for Justin was in January of '93.
Oh
Yeah.
my goodness. And so you were able to be there for the birth of your second child.
Yes. So
Wow. You didn't
yeah,
miss a beat.
not a beat. So.
And then it all worked out. And the coolest part about that is Mr. Justin himself called you to tell you about it.
Yeah.
So what was it like then? Because also, speaking of listening to the podcast, we've had Tom and Darla on who have been able to talk about, and Nancy now, have been able to talk about what Mr. Justin was like. But what was he like, especially because you were on the sales side of things?
Well, one of the coolest things that I've probably ever experienced was Billy had told me that one thing I did during January for the Dallas market was I took a customer to the Fort Worth Rodeo and sat in the Justin box. And it was Mike and Lisa Knight at Boots and More in Jackson, Mississippi, and Mike's gone now.
Okay.
So that first rodeo, we had parking passes where you park, right up behind there, and we go in there, and it's Mike and Lisa, myself, Mr. and Mrs. Justin, and Gary Liggett and his wife. So they stood up there and just talked, and I sat back with Mr. Justin and just listened to stories.
I bet. Wow.
He told me stories about traveling, parts of my territory, and things like that. It was just truly unbelievable because he was such a cool person. Didn't meet a stranger. Loved cowboys and rodeo. That's why we're involved in everything we are.
Yes.
So it was just so cool working for a legend.
And that's really cool to hear, I think, too, personally, as someone who works here, even to hear how passionate he was about Cowboys and Cowgirls. And it wasn't just like, oh, we're going to create the Justin Cowboy Crisis Fund or the Justin Sports Medicine Team just to look good. No, he truly had a heart for Cowboys, Cowgirls, anyone competing rodeo. In general, they're very, very philanthropic. They did a lot for the community of Fort Worth. He was even the mayor. Were you here when he was the mayor? That was probably before you.
So.
Okay, so anyways, that's still so cool to hear that he was so just like passionate about it.
Right.
And I think that helped you guys feel like you were equipped and you could do your job as salesmen too.
Right. Well, I grew up with posters of Larry Mahan and Jim Shoulders on my wall.
Legends.
That was my heroes,
Wow.
And that was the thing with Mr. Justin. It wasn't just to sell boots. It was like, I want to take care of cowboys.
Wow.
We could take all that money that we put in the sports medicine program. We could go sponsor something in NASCAR. We could go just do it in advertising. It's millions of dollars, but we don't. We do it in tape and medical care. And I've been fortunate to at the Dixie National Rodeo in Jackson spend a lot of time in the healer trailer.
Okay.
And with Zig, Zig was on a podcast recently. He was involved in sports medicine. I've met Don Andrews, all these guys.
Wow.
I had a conversation with Liesl Harris in the healer trailer in Jackson a year before he passed.
Oh, my goodness.
So that was another plus for me. I was still able to be involved around the rodeo working for Justin. So
that is a cool part, too, because anyone who's done rodeo for a little bit of time, but especially pro rodeo, you become a family. And then when that's taken away, like Cody Johnson's song, Dear Rodeo, when you can't do that anymore, it is like a weird. So the fact that you've been able to be involved and keep with it and keep up with your buddies that now work at other brands, that's so cool, too.
Yeah, it's not the, you don't miss getting thrown off, run over, stomped and whatever, but it's the friends, you know, so.
Yeah. Well, and speaking of that, there's so many things that I could ask you around that, but I kind of want to move the conversation a little bit forward because you mentioned NASCAR, your passion for NASCAR and stuff. I think another passion you have is sports. And we were just talking off the podcast. Sports is like almost a hot topic in your area because you're Mississippi, Alabama, and Tennessee, which is like, whoa.
The heart of the SEC. So.
Yes, but to go a little bit higher to the NFL, recently you got to go to tight end university with Travis Kelce, George Kittle, and so many others. Dak Prescott. Was Dak there? Dak wasn't there.
He was there. Yeah, throwing passes.
Tell me about that because you're this tall, David. You're not a small guy.
Yeah.
And they were.
Well, Taylor Morton, our head of PR, she called me and she said, "What are you doing in the first part of June?" And I said, "Well, I don't know. What do you need?" And she said, "Well," she told me all about being involved with Tight End University. And so she said, "We need someone that's not going to go up there and be all goo-goo-eyed."
Fangirl.
Yeah, and so, and there's guys that are that way,
Yes.
And I love sports.
Yes.
My two favorite teams are the New Orleans Saints and whoever's playing Dallas. So I'll probably make the Cowboy fan mad, but that's just,
that's part of it, right?
That is. So, but And she told me about the whole thing, and I was somewhat familiar. So immediately I get on Instagram, and it's Travis Kelce, George Kittle, and Greg Olsen.
Greg Olsen, okay.
And it's basically a fraternity for tight ends in the NFL.
Wow.
They started doing this in Nashville. I think this was the 4th year. George Kittle and his wife live in Nashville in the off season, and that's why they have it there. So they bring them up there, and they do drills. They give them gift bags. They have a concert. They do all kind of stuff like that.
There was even like a charity aspect at some point too.
Yeah, they
did something for
they
charity.
go out to some of the local schools and let the kids run drills and everything with these NFL superstars.
Oh my gosh.
It was such a cool deal.
Yeah.
But they're NFL superstars. You see stuff in the media, and good and bad, and you just didn't know what to expect.
Right.
I kind of expected some prima donnas or some attitude. You just never know.
Yeah.
Those guys couldn't have been more nice. Every one of them was just so neat, and so we put them all in boots, and they had a choice of boots, and they asked questions. A lot of them never wore a boot before about the fit and everything. It was just really neat, and it's there was a lady there from the NFL Network that we had to sign a deal to where they could put us on TV, and supposedly we're going to be on this special in October.
Okay, well, let's get this podcast out then before then, so we can hear it. Yeah.
So she said, these guys are like the plumbers and the electricians in the NFL. They score touchdowns. They run all down on kickoffs, punt returns, block.
Do
so
it
they're
all.
and she was so true.
Yeah.
But it was just truly amazing how cool all those guys were. Yeah, now some of them are massive.
I was going to say, did we have boots big enough for their feet?
Yeah, we did. We I think the largest we had was 14 double E, but we were able to pretty much fit everybody. So
That we had a boot that big, or we had a foot that big? I guess both.
the boot,
But-
yeah. A lot of those
my
guys,
goodness.
with an athletic shoe is generally a couple sizes bigger than a boot.
That's true. Room
But,
to move and
yeah.
grow and swell and all that.
Yeah, and then we met some NFL Network people. We met I don't remember this gentleman's name, but he was does security for George Kittle and the 49ers. Just a lot of people behind the scenes, and it was just a really cool experience. So
I can only imagine it was.
yeah.
And I think that, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think one of the guys had never had cowboy boots before.
I'd say probably half of them never had. So
Wow.
yeah, and now there was some. There's one of the really neatest guys was Dallas Clark, who was the tight end in Indianapolis when Peyton Manning was up there, and he's from Iowa, and I think he's got a farm, but his son was with him. He's had boots, and was kind of a real tight knit group from Iowa that all went to school up there from the Dakotas, and a lot of those guys are from that part of the country, had worn boots and had boots, but there was other guys their first pair. So,
oh my gosh.
yeah,
Well,
they ask a lot of questions about how they're supposed to fit and how to take care of them, and then we put their wives or girlfriend in boots. So
so they got to kind of have a pair.
Yeah, it was really a cool deal. So,
That is awesome, and I'm so happy that you got to go, because it seems like in the pictures it looked like you were so thankful to be there, and that's really cool too.
Well, and we got to go to their opening night party. The whole event was in the Thompson Hotel down in the Gulch in Nashville.
Okay.
And they have a bar like on the 10th floor, a big open air bar. We're gonna go to that party. Now that was like something from a TV show.
I
mean,
bet.
it was just everywhere you look, it's people and superstars, and it was really, really cool. So, and Kittle and Kelce and Greg Olsen got up and spoke to everybody, and so.
Oh my goodness, that makes me so happy, because I am fairly new to fantasy football, and George Kittle carried me. I ended up winning on our team, our marketing fantasy football. So that makes me feel better. Not only is he good on the field, but he's also good as a person too. All of them. Yeah. That's so cool. So
and
cool, David.
I got to talk to Dak, which was it was pretty cool, because both my daughters went to Mississippi State, and they were up there during Dak's era. And so I told Taylor, I said, look, I'm going to have to be a little bit of a fan.
Yeah.
And so I
For
introduced
Dak.
myself, and we talked about the Auburn game when State went to #1 after that win. And then we talked about the LSU game when he goes into Tiger Stadium, comes back with a win. It was cool talking to him.
Whoa, that is really cool. Thinking of my husband and the way he loves sports and stuff, most guys, I guess, that seems like an awesome moment for you that you get to cherish forever.
Pretty cool.
That is, beyond cool.
Yeah.
And I can't help but think too, like for you, you've seen some pretty cool things throughout the decades at Justin.
Yeah.
So talk about like some of the cool, prominent things that you've seen as a Justin sales rep. So this is probably a highlight, Tight End University, but now, we're partners with George Strait, we're partners with Reba. You being in Nashville, tell me about, actually, let's just start there. Tell me about some of the things that you see in Nashville or in Tennessee in general as one of the reps.
What's crazy, I traveled Nashville 30 years ago, 32 years ago for Stetson and Resistol and Panhandle's other companies.
Okay.
And then in May of 22 is when we started carrying all the brands.
Yes.
And I got Tennessee. So I really hadn't been up there, in about 30 years.
Wow.
So Nashville is just insane.
It is.
It truly is insane. So, and it's exploded with the size and everything. So just going down there on Broadway and seeing all that craziness with all the restaurants and nightclubs and then the traffic, it's just really something. So.
Oh, yeah. And you're doing an exceptional job. I have so much to learn from you, but even so many of the younger ones, Owen Walker, who's fairly new, we'll say newer on the sales team, and even some of the guys and gals, now Sarah Feld is on our sales team as well, having them come into Justin and you being one of the ones that has been there and you're able to help them along the way, that means so much too. So I guess what is your best piece of advice for someone that wants to get into sales or wants to get into the Western industry?
People like buying from people they like.
Yes.
It's just, being personable.
Yeah.
That's, my oldest daughter found out how much I liked cold calls, and she couldn't believe that because she just hates that.
Yeah, I hate them too.
I just don't meet a stranger. I can talk the horns off a billy goat.
I can talk the horns off a billy goat.
My dad was that way. I can remember we were little going to the state fair, and he'd see all these people who'd meet, and we couldn't even get around to ride rides because he's talking all the time.
Aww.
Well, my daughters fuss about me the same thing. Said, all you do is talk.
But it's gotten you pretty far.
Yeah.
I even just said in another podcast, but then even earlier today, we're not in the boot business, we're in the people business.
Exactly. Yeah. It's gotten, gift of gab has gotten me in some bad situations and gotten me out of some bad situations.
The gift of gab has gotten you on this podcast. Whether that's good or bad, we'll determine.
Yeah.
I'm just kidding. No, it's been fun getting to have you. And before we go, one last closing question.
Yeah.
If you could look back at yourself 35 years ago, before you started really into the industry, what piece of advice would you give yourself?
Probably make more timely investments.
Okay.
Financially. I wish somebody would have sat me down when I was in my 20s and just, you thought money, it just
told you about things.
Start then.
Yeah.
To start doing things rather than wait until you get later in life. That's probably one of the biggest things. So
that's solid.
Yeah.
Thank you for that. That's good. So many people out there need that. I know my husband and I, we need that advice.
Oh yeah, and it's easy to think you need this or need that or need that new truck or that new trailer, and it's. Of course, that's why we sell exotic boots.
Right.
So
impulse.
That's right. So.
Well, David, it's been so good getting to know your story, even just a small portion of it. I feel like we need a whole nother episode to continue this, but I appreciate you taking the time out of your busy schedule because I know
welcome.
You have a bunch of clients and
You're
retailers
welcome.
coming to buy. So thank you, David. And thank you for listening to the Kick Your Boots Up podcast.
You're welcome.
All the time.
The only problem with them is they're not long enough.
They're not long enough.
And if I'm traveling, and I have to constantly, run through them like that. So, but
That's true.
I think I'm completely caught up.
Wow.
So.
Well, you're definitely caught up considering we've taken a break a time or two here and there.
Yeah.
And you're probably the one that would notice. Nobody else really notices. But anyways, if you liked what you saw, feel free to like, subscribe, share it with your friends, tell everyone about it. And if you have any questions for David, as always, comment them below. We'll get them to David. And who knows, maybe if you have enough questions, we might even get him to take over our Instagram to answer those. Now that is where the unedited content would be. No, you guys, thank you for listening. We'll see you the next time you kick your boots up. Thanks for joining us on Kick Your Boots Up.
I'm your host, Taylor McAdams, and we can't wait to share the next story of the West. Until then, feel free to like, subscribe, and leave us a review. Follow us on social media at Justin Boots to keep up with our next episode. And we'll see you the next time you kick your boots up.